The Amish man was born blind until a poor Apache girl did the impossible. On the edge of a cold desert, a quiet carpenter who's never seen a sunrise hears a gunshot and a girl's cry for help. He doesn't see her, but he feels her fear, her trembling hands, her blood in the snow. He saves her life, but what she gives back changes his forever. Because that night, under the flicker of a lantern, she touches his eyes, and for the first time, he sees. But miracles on this frontier come with a price. The town calls her a witch. The preacher says it's the devil's work. Now the man who just found his sight must risk losing everything to protect the girl who gave it to him. As the church bell tolls and torches rise against them, if God used her hands to bring light, who dares call it sin? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The high desert woke slow under a pale winter sun. Frost clung to the sage and made each stem shine like it wore tiny bells. In the small cottonwood grove below Red Mesa, a creek ran thin under a glass skin of ice. The air smelled like juniper and cold iron. Far off, a hawk cried once, and then the land went quiet again. Silas Brenner stepped out of his cabin and listened to the morning. He liked to count the sounds: the wind at the eaves, the mule stamping in the lean-to, the creek's soft talk. He had done this each day since he came west alone. He could not see, but he knew where he was by sound and touch, and that steadied his heart. He felt for the doorpost, smooth from many hands, then found the bucket with his foot. He lifted it and walked the path to the water, tapping each stone with the toe of his boot. The path was his friend. He had set each flat rock, one by one, in a straight line from the cabin to the creek. 14 steps to the cottonwood root. 2 more to the lip of the bank. He could name the world by small things like that. He paused and prayed in a whisper. Lord, thank you for one more day. Keep my hand steady. Keep my mind quiet. Thy will be done. The bucket dipped through the ice with a crack and a gulp. He lifted it, water sloshing cold over his knuckles. The sting told him the day would demand patience. He smiled a little and turned back for home. Then came the gunshot. It bounced from rock to rock and rolled down the canyon like a hard drum. A second shot followed. After it, he heard a small cry. It was brief, a thin thread of sound, but it carried grief so sharp it made his chest ache. Silas set the bucket down so quick the handle rattled. His breath came short. He turned his head to catch the wind. The cry had come from the east side, up toward the broken shelf where coyotes denned. He had walked that way many times, counting paces, mapping it in his memory. But he had never gone there in winter. Ice made the rock cruel. He did not think long. He reached, inside the door, took his wool coat from its peg, and shrugged it on. He felt for his walking staff, found it, and set out toward the sound. Snow lay in small pockets under the shadow of the mesa. The ground was stiff and loud under his boots. He moved careful, tapping with the staff before he set his weight down. He kept his left hand out to feel brush and rock. He counted steps to steady his mind. 30 to the old fence post. 20 to the split boulder that smelled like rain when it warmed. 10 to the shelf. He stopped and listened. At first there was only his own breath. Then he heard it again, softer now, a whimper and a hiss of pain. It came from behind a tumble of rocks above him. "Hello?" he called. "I mean no harm. My name is Silas. Speak if you can." Silence. A quick scrape like leather on stone. The smell of blood reached him. Sharp, iron, fresh. He set his staff aside so he could use both hands to climb. His fingers found cold ledges and patches of ice. He pulled himself up, slow and sure, knees scraping, breath fogging the air. He set his palm on a patch of lichen, rough as an old jacket, and then his hand found fabric, woven, damp, warm. The body flinched, a small gasp escaped. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're hurt. I can carry you. I'll take you home." He felt for the wound with careful fingers. The cloth was torn at the shoulder, the skin there burned like a kettle. His hand came away wet. Blood had run down the upper arm and cooled in the cold air. He heard the fast, tight breathing of someone trying not to cry. "Can you speak?" he asked. A whisper came, broken and hoarse. Nalina, he repeated, shaping the sound. "Much obliged, Nalina. I'm Silas." He felt for her other arm and found a narrow wrist. Her hand twitched in his grip, not strong. He took the edge of his coat and wiped at her shoulder to see if the bleeding slowed. He did not know the color of her skin or eyes, but he felt braids over one ear and the small beads of a necklace under his thumb. "Others?" he asked. "Are there men nearby?" She breathed out one word like a warning. "Hunters." Silas's heart kicked once, hard. He listened again. The world held its breath. No hoofbeats, no voices, only the hawk somewhere overhead and the creek far behind him. If there were men, they were not close now. Maybe they had chased and lost her in the rocks. "We must go," he said. "My cabin is close. I will carry you." He slid one arm under her knees and one behind her back. She was light as a bundle of sticks, but he felt the heat of fever in her. She did not fight him. She made one small sound when he lifted, then went quiet, trusting him because there was no other choice. He climbed down slow, feeling for each hold with his boots. Twice his heel slipped, and he caught himself with his shoulder against the rock. When they reached flat ground, he paused to breathe, chest heaving. The cold bit his lungs, but he felt strong enough. "Hold to my neck," he said. "We will walk. It's not far." Her arms circled him, small and trembling. He could feel the beadwork press through his coat. He started for home, counting steps again. He set the staff under one arm to steady himself, but he kept most of his focus on her weight and her breathing. They crossed the sage flats. The wind came up and tugged at his coat. He turned his face from it to shelter her. She coughed once, sharp and raw. He whispered the only prayer he knew when fear rose quick. "Lord, lead us by the still waters," and kept going. At the cottonwoods he felt the familiar flare of the root under his boot. He stepped around it. The creek's ice groaned like an old door. He could smell the smoke from his chimney now, faint and sweet. Relief washed over him so strong it felt like heat. They reached the door. He leaned Nalina against the post a second while he fumbled for the latch. The wood was cold, but his hands knew every notch. The door swung in with a soft whine. Inside, the room held the day's last light and the smell of coffee grounds in the tin can. The stove ticked as embers settled. He carried her to the bed by the wall, set her down, and pulled the quilt up over her. The quilt was thick and pieced in squares his late wife had sewn years ago. He felt the stitches under his fingers, and his throat tightened. "It's warm here," he said. "You're safe." She trembled still, teeth clicking, breath sharp. He reached for the lamp on the shelf by memory, found the cool glass, the tin handle, the little wheel. He set it on the table and felt for the matches in the wooden dish. "Light first," he said, half to himself. "Water, then cloth. We will see to that shoulder." He struck the match. The tiny flare brought a soft heat to his cheek, and a small sound, a hopeful sound, rose in him. He touched the flame to the lamp wick. The lamp caught and gave a steady glow that turned the cabin gold. Silas glanced toward the bed, though his eyes gave him nothing. Habit made him try. He moved back to her and felt her forehead. Too warm. He set a hand on her wrist, fast pulse. He lowered his head and spoke near her ear so she would hear comfort in his voice. "I will help you," he said. "You are not alone." Outside, the winter wind moved along the walls like a slow hand. Inside, the lamp made a soft circle on the table, and the first shadows of night reached for the corners. Silas took the kettle, filled it from the bucket by the door, and set it on the stove. As the metal began to tick and hum, he laid out clean cloths and his small tin of carbolic. He looked, without seeing, toward where she lay, and felt a strange pull in his chest. He had lived so long in quiet that every change felt large. Yet this change felt like it had waited for him since the day he was born. The kettle began to sing. He lifted it by the handle, poured hot water into a bowl, and carried it to the table beside the bed. He rolled up his sleeves, washed his hands in the steam, and prayed once more. "Lord, guide my hands." He turned to her shoulder. The lamplight touched the quilt and the shine of the bowl. The work was before him. The night was young, and the first step toward new life had already begun. The wind came down from the mesa after sundown, cold enough to make the doorboards hum. Inside the cabin, Silas worked fast. He filled a basin with warm water from the kettle, wrung a strip of linen, and knelt by the bed. The girl's eyes stayed half closed. Her breath came short, like each one cost her something. When Silas pressed the cloth to her shoulder, she hissed and tried to pull away. "Easy now," he said. "The pain means it's cleaning out." She did not answer, only bit her lip. He could feel her muscles shake under his palm. He worked by memory, the feel of torn flesh, the smell of blood gone stale, and tied the bandage snug with a sailor's knot. When it was done, he stepped back and poured a little broth into a tin cup. He lifted her head and touched the cup to her lips. She drank slow, blinking at the lamp's warm glow. "You saved me," she whispered. Her voice was thin as paper. Silas smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Maybe you saved me too. I ain't had company in a spell." She tried a faint smile in return, but weariness won. When she slept, Silas sat at the table, listening to the fire breathe and the night move outside. He thought about the name she'd given, Nelina. He didn't know what it meant, but it sounded like wind sliding through pine. Hours passed. He trimmed the wick, stirred the coals, and mended a loose hinge just to keep his hands busy. Every now and then he checked her fever, whispering a verse his mother once said over him. "He shall give his angels charge over thee." When dawn came, the snow had stopped. The cabin roof popped with the first heat. Nelina stirred and sat up a little. Her skin looked pale in the light. Silas fetched more water. "You keepin' your strength?" She nodded, eyes wandering the room, rough table, shelf of carved boxes, a wall hung with tools. "You live here alone?" "Since my family passed. Work keeps me." "You can't see," she said softly, more question than insult. "Never have. But I know my way fine. Every plank in this place is a friend." He chuckled. "Even the ones that squeak." For a long while they spoke little. She helped him stir cornmeal, moving slow with her good arm. He listened to her hum under her breath, a tune like water running over stone. At midday she told him of her brother. "They killed him near the ridge. Said he stole horses. He didn't. We were trading. They didn't ask." Silas bowed his head. "I'm sorry. Folks see what they expect to see." She studied him, puzzled. "You talk like preacher, but you don't judge." "I judge my own heart plenty. That's enough work for one man." The day stretched quiet. He showed her how to feed the stove, how to oil the latch so it wouldn't freeze. She described the land beyond his door, how the snow shone pink at dusk, how smoke from the fort curled like ghost fingers. He listened, trying to picture it, and for the first time wished he could. When evening came, they ate side by side at the small table. The lamplight shivered between them. Silas felt something stirring. Hope, maybe, or simply the comfort of not hearing only his own breath. As he banked the fire, Nalina asked, "Why you help me?" He thought for a moment. "Because the Lord don't pass by those in need. Neither should I." She looked at him long, eyes soft. "Maybe he sent you." He smiled, setting his hat on the peg. "Maybe he sent you too." Outside, coyotes called to one another across the frozen flats. Inside, warmth spread slow through the logs, and two strangers who should have feared each other shared the same quiet peace. Morning came with a silver hush. The frost on the window crackled as the stove's heat spread. Silas rose early, the way he always did, and found the cabin softer somehow, like the air itself had changed. He listened for the girl's breathing and heard it slow and even. Her fever had eased. He made coffee by habit, measuring the grounds with his fingers. When the smell filled the room, he smiled. "You awake?" he asked. Nalina stirred under the quilt. "It smells good." "It'll warm you," he said, pouring her a little in a tin cup and cutting it with milk so it wouldn't scald. She took it, cupping it between both hands. He could almost feel her smile. Silas sat at the table carving a small wooden spoon, his knife whispering against the grain. "Tell me again what color the sky is today," he said. She looked toward the window, eyes bright. "It's blue, like water on the mountain, but lighter." He nodded slowly. "I think I can see it in my mind." She laughed. "You see more than most who have eyes." Later, when he checked her wound, he found the swelling down. She didn't flinch as much when he touched it. "Healing good," she said. "I reckon you've a strong will," he replied. By afternoon, she insisted on helping him split kindling. He guided her hands on the axe handle, showing her how to balance the weight. "Watch your fingers. These old blades have a temper." She smiled shyly. "You teach like my mother." "That so?" She said, "Don't fear the tool. Fear your carelessness." He chuckled. "Your mother was a wise woman." The sun dipped low, painting the window gold. Silas listened as Nalina began to hum again, a tune soft as wind over grass. She said it was a song for healing. "My people sing to the world so it remembers kindness," she said. That night, after supper, Silas sat reading from his worn Bible. His voice filled the room like calm rain. Nalina lay back on the bed, watching his face as the firelight danced across it. He stopped at a passage. "The blind shall see," and smiled at the thought, though he'd long accepted he never would. When he closed the book, he heard her whisper something in Apache. Her tone was gentle like a prayer. "What's that mean?" he asked. "It means, the eyes of the heart see first." He nodded. "That's fine truth." She rose quietly, crossed the room, and placed her hand on his brow. "You helped me," she said. "Now I help you." Her palm was warm. He meant to thank her, but a strange pulse ran through him, like light itself breathed into his skull. For a heartbeat, he thought the fire had flared too bright. Then the room opened before him. He gasped. The walls, the rough boards, the shimmer of flame, all came clear. He could see her face, framed by black braids and shadow. Tears filled his eyes, blurring everything again, but he knew what had happened. "I can see," he whispered, trembling. "Sweet Lord, I can see." Nalina stepped back, frightened and amazed. "It worked," she said softly. "The song of life worked." He looked around the cabin as though it were heaven itself. The lamp's glow, the gleam of iron pots, the red quilt, her hand still trembling in the light. Then he fell to his knees, hands shaking. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind died to a whisper. Nalina knelt beside him, awe in her eyes. Neither spoke again that night. The miracle hung between them like a living thing, breathing, waiting. When Silas finally slept, he dreamed of colors he'd never known, of blue like sky, red like heart's blood, and a girl whose kindness had pulled light out of darkness. Silas woke before dawn, heart racing like a colt unbroken. For a long time, he lay still, afraid to open his eyes in case the miracle had vanished with the night. When he finally did, the world met him in color. Soft gray light through the frosted window, a curl of wood smoke rising from the stove, the quilt on his knees stitched in reds and blues he'd only ever imagined. He laughed, quiet at first, then louder, until Nalina stirred beneath the blanket on the other cot. She blinked at him, wary but smiling. "You see still?" she asked. "I see everything," he said, "and it's more than I thought God made." She watched him turn his face toward the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. His eyes, once dull, now shone pale green. When he stood, the chair legs scraped across the floor, and he stared at his own hands, rough, scarred, alive. They spent the morning marveling. Nalina showed him the difference between bark and stone, how sunlight caught the edges of her beadwork. He traced colors with a reverent finger, whispering their names. "Gold," he murmured, "and that one, red like the fire's heart." By mid-morning, he saddled the mule and told her he needed to ride to town. "If folks see this, maybe they'll know it's no sin to help each other," he said. She nodded but looked uneasy. "People fear what they don't know," she warned. He smiled. "Then we'll teach them better." The ride into Arroyo Crossing took 2 hours. The land rolled wide and open, dotted with yucca and the silver bones of winter grass. Silas stared at everything, the cloud edges, the way light hit rock, even the mule's shaggy ears bobbing in rhythm. He could not stop smiling. The first faces in town startled him. He'd known their voices for years, the blacksmith with his deep laugh, the widow who sold eggs. Now, to see them made him dizzy. He tipped his hat to each, nearly weeping when someone greeted him by name. At the general store, Reverend Avery happened by, his black coat flapping in the cold. "Brother Brenner," he said, squinting, "is that truly you walking free of your stick?" "It is, Reverend," Silas answered, grinning. "The Lord's granted me sight." The preacher blinked. "After near 40 years blind? By what doctor's hand?" Silas hesitated. "Not a doctor, a girl in need, an Apache girl. She prayed over me." Avery's face stiffened. Around them, townsfolk slowed to listen. A woman whispered, "He said Apache?" "Yes," Silas said proudly. "The Lord works through whom he chooses. He used her hands." A murmur rippled through the street. The blacksmith crossed his arms. "You letting one of them heathens lay hands on you, Brenner?" "She ain't heathen," Silas said. "She's kind. Brave. God's child same as you." Reverend Avery raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Brother, I caution you. The devil can dress as light to test the faithful. You must pray hard before calling this a miracle." Silas's heart sank, but his voice stayed steady. "I have prayed. I know grace when I see it." The Reverend's eyes softened only a little. "Take care, Silas. The people here scare easy." By the time Silas left town, whispers followed him down the street. He could feel eyes on his back. Still, he rode home smiling, determined not to let doubt steal what he'd been given. When he reached the cabin, the sky had gone red with sunset. Nalina waited by the door, anxious. "They believe you?" He set his hat on the post. "Some did, some didn't. But truth don't vanish because men fear it." She looked down. "They will come." He frowned. "Let 'em. I got nothing to hide." That night, Silas sat by the fire, sketching the first image of his life. A simple cross in the dirt floor, 2 lines meeting in light. Behind him, the wind rose again, whispering along the roof. He knew trouble might follow, but for now, he felt only gratitude. He looked at Nalina across the lamplight and thought, if God sent her to bring me sight, then he means for me to protect her too. The logs popped in the stove, scattering sparks like tiny stars. Outside, somewhere in the dark, hooves shifted in the distance, soft, uncertain, drawing near. By morning, the sound of distant hooves no longer seemed like a dream. Silas stood on his porch, eyes squinting against the rising sun, and saw 3 riders moving slow through the sagebrush. Dust lifted behind them in a thin gray tail. Inside, Nalina froze at the creak of saddles. "They come," she whispered. Silas took his coat from the peg and stepped outside. The riders halted a few yards away. One wore a soldier's coat faded from too much sun. Another had a bounty badge pinned crooked on his vest. The third carried a paper folded tight in his hand. The man with the badge spoke first. "We're looking for an Apache girl, about 16, wounded in the left shoulder. Word is she's hiding out near here." Silas kept his voice calm. "Ain't seen anyone like that?" The man narrowed his eyes. "Funny. Town says a blind carpenter got his sight back 'cause of an Indian girl's spell." Silas's jaw tightened. "Wasn't no spell. It was prayer and God's mercy." "God's mercy don't change a man's eyes," the bounty hunter said, spitting into the dirt. "But the devil's tricks might." The soldier at his side shifted uneasily. "Let's not get tangled in superstition. We've got orders to question, not judge." He took a half step forward. "You mind if we look around, mister?" Silas stood firm in the doorway. "You can look from where you're sittin'. This is my home, and no law says you can search it without warrant." The man with the paper raised it. "We got one, signed by Sergeant Eli Porter, Fort Wingate." The name struck Silas. He knew of Porter, an old soldier who kept order more by fear than kindness. Still, he stepped aside, heart heavy. "Do what you came to do, but you'll find nothing worth taking." They dismounted. While the soldier checked the barn, the bounty hunter pushed open the cabin door. Inside, the air smelled of pine smoke and coffee. Nalina had hidden in the wood box behind the stacked firewood, wrapped in an old tarp. Silas prayed she stayed still. The bounty man's boots thudded across the floor. He kicked the bed frame once, opened a crate, then spat. Empty. When they left, Silas waited until their hoofbeats faded. Then he shut the door and pulled away the tarp. Nalina crawled out, shaking, her dark hair dusted with sawdust. "They will come again," she said, voice trembling. Silas nodded. "Aye, but we'll be gone before they do." He spent the next hour packing flour, dried beans, and a small tool roll into a sack. "We'll go to the mission. Nobody lives there now. It's holy ground, and soldiers don't care to chase ghosts." Nalina touched the bandage on her shoulder. "You would leave your home for me?" Silas looked at the walls, every board shaped by his hands, and felt the ache of parting. "The Lord gave me sight through you. Seems right, I use it to see you safe." Before they left, he knelt by his workbench and traced the carvings he'd made while blind. The smooth curve of a rocking chair arm, the tiny inlay of a bird he'd never seen till now. Then he set his tools down and whispered, "You've done your work well, my friends." By late afternoon, they were on the trail, the mule loaded with supplies. The wind shifted cold from the north. Silas kept glancing at the horizon, his new eyes stinging from glare and worry. At a ridge, he turned for one last look at the cabin, smoke curling from its chimney like a farewell. He reached for Nalina's hand and gave it a firm squeeze. "We'll find peace where folks' tongues can't reach." That night they camped near a dry wash. Coyotes yipped far off, and the stars burned bright above the dark mesas. Nalina lay close to the fire, whispering something in her language. Silas couldn't understand, but he knew it was prayer. He added a stick to the flames and said softly, "I reckon miracles make enemies quicker than friends." Nalina opened her eyes, the firelight flickering in them. "Then we keep walking till we find friends." Silas nodded, pulling his coat tighter. "Aye," he said. "We'll do just that." The wind rose again, carrying the far-off sound of hooves, but this time it faded into the night, leaving only the crackle of fire and the steady rhythm of two hearts determined to keep moving. They left before dawn, when the stars were still pale above the mesa. The desert air carried the kind of cold that burned the lungs, but Silas didn't complain. He led the mule, its hooves crunching on frost, while Nalina walked beside him, wrapped in a blanket. The trail wound between cliffs that glowed faintly in the early light. The mule's breath puffed white. Every few miles, they stopped to rest. Silas had packed a small sack of flour, beans, jerky, and 2 canteens. "It'll have to last," he said. Nalina nodded, scanning the land. "The mission is far?" 2 days if weather stays fair. It sits near a dry canyon north of Fort Wingate. Old priests built it long ago. As the sun climbed, they reached the flats, miles of open sand and scrub. The silence was wide enough to swallow sound. Once, Nalina pointed toward a hawk circling high. "It watches," she said. "My people say hawks spirit guards travelers." Silas smiled. "Then I'm glad he's along." By mid-morning, his eyes ached from too much light. He was still learning how to live with sight, how bright the world could be, how full of edges and shimmer. He lifted his hand to shade his face, and marveled again at its shape. "Seems strange," he said quietly, "that the Lord gave me eyes just as trouble came looking for me." Nalina walked in silence for a while. "Maybe he gave you sight to see what courage looks like." He glanced at her, startled by the strength in her voice. "You sound older than your years." "I have seen too much," she said simply. They stopped at a dry wash to rest the mule. Silas unrolled a blanket, and they ate from a small pouch of cornmeal cakes. The wind picked up, sharp and cold. He noticed how she always faced the breeze, eyes closed, as if listening to something far away. "What do you hear?" he asked. "The land," she said. "It speaks. The rocks remember everything. The wind carries stories. If you listen long enough, you can hear them." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why I heard your cry that day. I was listening for more than sound." She looked at him, eyes soft. "Then you were ready for the miracle." They pressed on, the terrain rougher now. Toward afternoon, clouds gathered thick and dark. By the time the first drop hit Silas's cheek, he knew the storm would break before nightfall. "Up ahead," Nalina said, pointing toward a cluster of rocks shaped like a gate. "There's shelter under those ledges." They hurried, the wind growing fierce. When the rain came, it hit hard and cold. They ducked beneath the rocks just as lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled over them like a wagon crossing stone. Silas spread his coat around her shoulders, ignoring the wet chill that soaked his shirt. The mule shifted nervously nearby. "We'll wait it out," he said. The storm raged for hours. Water poured from the cliffs in thin silver sheets. They huddled close beside a small fire he managed to coax from dry grass. Nalina began to hum, low and steady. The tune calmed him as much as the flame did. "Your song," he said softly. "It sounds like the wind's kin." "It asks the spirits to remember mercy," she replied, "even when the world forgets." When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean. The air smelled of wet sage and dust. They stepped out, stretching their stiff limbs. By midday, the horizon opened to reveal the mission. It stood half buried in sand, an old adobe chapel with one tower still upright. Vines curled up its walls, and a wooden cross leaned crooked at the roof line. "There," Silas said, awe softening his voice. "A house of God still waitin'." They approached slowly. Birds fluttered from the doorway. Inside, sunlight spilled through a broken window, lighting the cracked altar. Dust danced in the beams like gold. Silas set down the packs and looked around. "We'll fix her up," he said. "Make her livable again." Nalina touched the old stone font where rainwater had gathered. "This place still breathes," she said. Silas knelt beside her, dipping his hand in the cool water. "Then it's where we belong." As the evening came, they lit a small fire in the corner and listened to coyotes calling from afar. The mission walls creaked in the wind but held steady. For the first time in days, Silas felt peace settle deep in his bones. He whispered a quiet prayer before sleep. "Thank you, Lord, for leading blind men to safe ground." And as Nalina closed her eyes beside the fire, she whispered one in her own tongue, asking that this refuge become not just their shelter, but their beginning. The next morning dawned gold over the mesa. The air was fresh, scrubbed clean by the storm. Silas stepped outside the old mission and watched mist rise from the canyon below. Every stone around him glowed with light. It felt like standing inside a hymn. Inside, Nalina knelt near the altar, gathering scattered bits of glass and old candle stubs. "We can make it clean again," she said, her voice firm despite her tiredness. Silas nodded. "We'll make it a home." They spent the day working side by side. Silas patched holes in the roof with boards scavenged from the ruined stable. Nalina swept the floor until dust swirled like spirits leaving. She found a cracked bucket, filled it from a spring behind the chapel, and carried it carefully inside. "The water's good," she said. "Sweet. Comes from deep under the rock." Silas smiled. "Then God kept it waiting for us." By noon, the scent of sage and cedar filled the air. Silas repaired a bench, humming softly. Nalina washed the soot from the altar and placed wildflowers she'd gathered near the creek. The colors, red, yellow, and white, brightened the dim space. When they stopped to rest, they sat on the steps, sharing cornbread and dried apples. The wind stirred her hair, and Silas caught himself watching the way light fell across her face. "You make this place feel alive again," he said quietly. Nalina smiled faintly. "My people say places remember kindness." In the evenings, they built a small fire in a pit by the doorway and prayed in their own ways. Silas reading softly from his Bible, Nalina singing in her language. The two voices, one spoken, one sung, wove together like the sound of river and wind. Days passed, and travelers began to notice smoke rising from the old mission. A widow passing with her mule stopped one evening, drawn by curiosity. Silas offered her bread and coffee. "We're just keeping the place from falling apart," he said. The woman left with tears in her eyes, promising to tell others of the man once blind and the Indian girl who made the ruins shine again. Soon others came. A farmer seeking tools repaired, a lost rider asking directions. Some brought food or candles. Silas never turned anyone away. "Ain't no one too poor to help," he said. At night, Nalina would sit near the spring, singing softly while he carved wood by the firelight. He began shaping crosses and small animals to give to travelers. She watched the way his hands moved, now steady, confident. "You carve with your heart," she told him. He smiled. "I reckon I did even when I couldn't see. Now I just have proof of it." One evening, when the air turned cool, she asked, "Will they come again? The men who hunted me?" Silas set down his knife and looked toward the open door. Beyond it, the sky burned red with sunset. "Maybe," he said, "but this time we'll stand together." She nodded, her face calm. "The land will stand with us." A few days later, dust rose on the road again, but not from bounty men. Reverend Avery rode up, his black coat snapping in the wind, Bible strapped to his saddle. He dismounted slow, taking in the scene. The cleaned chapel, the glowing fire, the girl and the man side by side. "I heard tell of miracles," he said cautiously. "I came to see if they were holy or heresy." Silas stepped forward, wiping his hands. "Both, maybe. Depends on who's asking." Avery studied Nalina. "They say she healed you." "She prayed for me," Silas corrected, "and the Lord answered." The preacher's gaze softened for a moment, but his jaw stayed tight. "I'll hold service here Sunday," he said. "If the Lord's truly in this house, he'll show it." When he rode off, Nalina turned to Silas. "He does not trust." "No," Silas said, watching the dust fade behind the preacher's horse. "But maybe he'll learn." That night, the firelight flickered across the old walls. Silas looked around the place they'd rebuilt and felt something sacred rising within him. Not just faith, but belonging. He whispered, "We've made a home between two worlds." Nalina nodded, smiling at the cross hanging above the doorway. "And both will find peace here." Outside, the coyotes sang again, but this time their voices sounded less like warning and more like welcome. Sunday came with the bright, sharp light of early spring. The sky over the mesa looked freshly washed, and a soft wind moved through the cottonwoods by the creek. Silas had swept the mission floor until it shone pale under the sunlight. He had even polished the wooden cross that hung behind the altar. Nalina placed a few wildflowers near the front, arranging them carefully, while Silas adjusted the benches they'd mended from old planks. "Never thought I'd see this place full again," he said. "You will," Nalina replied. "Today it will breathe." By mid-morning, folks began to arrive, families from the scattered ranches, a few miners from the ridge, and the widow Mercy Callahan, who brought a basket of bread. The small chapel filled with the scent of dust and sage and something hopeful. Then Reverend Avery rode up, his horse's hooves echoing against the stone. He entered, tall and solemn, Bible in hand, his eyes moving from Silas to Nalina. "Good to see you gathered," he said, voice deep but wary. "Let us begin." The people bowed their heads. Avery read from the book of John about light and darkness, his tone careful, heavy with warning. "Not every light comes from heaven," he preached. "The devil can dress in gentleness and deceive the heart." Silas sat near the front, jaw tightening. He looked at Nalina, who sat quietly, hands folded in, her lap, eyes lowered. She didn't understand all the words, but she felt their edge. When Avery finished, he looked directly at Silas. "You claim your eyes were opened by this girl's hand?" Silas rose slowly. "I do. I was blind since birth. She prayed over me, and now I see." A murmur ran through the pews. Avery lifted a hand. Then you would call her a prophet? A miracle worker? Silas shook his head. No, Reverend. I call her a child of God. That's miracle enough. The preacher frowned. We must test all spirits, brother. The Lord's work needs no help from heathen charms. Something inside Silas snapped. He stepped closer, his voice strong but calm. I was born blind. You've read that story, Reverend, the one where Jesus healed a man the same way. And when the priests asked him who sinned, he said, Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents. The works of God were shown through him. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the wind outside and the crackle of the old stove. Then Widow Callahan spoke softly from the back. Reverend, I've seen her help folks without pay. She nursed my neighbor's boy through fever. She ain't evil. A few others nodded. The preacher's jaw worked. Faith can blind as well as bless, he said finally. Be careful, friends. He closed his Bible, gave a stiff nod, and walked out. After the service, the small crowd lingered. Some came to shake Silas's hand, others to touch Nalina's arm, whispering thanks. But when the sun dipped, the visitors left, leaving the mission quiet again. That evening Silas sat on the step, carving by lantern light. Nalina joined him, her face shadowed. He does not believe, she said softly. He will, in time, Silas said. Truth don't need shouting. But his words, people hear them. Silas set the carving down. You can't fight fear with fear. Only kindness will turn it. She looked at the horizon where the light faded purple. Then I will keep singing. For a long while they sat in silence, the evening wind carrying the faint sound of her voice, a low, haunting hum that wrapped around the mission like a prayer. When the stars came out, Silas looked toward them and whispered, Lord, let his heart see what mine now can. He didn't notice Reverend Avery's horse standing far off on the ridge, the preacher watching the faint glow of their fire with something that looked like guilt or wonder. Spring deepened into summer across the high desert, painting the mesa in shades of green and gold. The mission, once a ruin, now stood whole again. The roof no longer leaked, the benches gleamed with oil, and the spring behind the chapel sang bright as glass. Travelers came often now, ranch hands with sore backs, mothers with feverish children, and wanderers who just needed water and a kind word. Silas worked each day in the yard beneath the cottonwoods, carving something new. Nalina gathered herbs and sang as she worked, her voice soft as wind over wheat. Together, they'd made a life built on small mercies. Bread shared, hands washed, prayers whispered over wounds. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the open doorway, Silas began his most careful work yet, a great wooden cross carved from two kinds of wood. The upright beam was oak, smooth and pale, the crosspiece mesquite, dark and rich. For both peoples, he said, yours and mine. Joined together, they'll never break. Nalina touched the rough grain and smiled. 2 hearts, 1 promise. She brought him water as he worked, the scent of sawdust mixed with the desert wind. Each chip that fell seemed to carry part of his gratitude. Every stroke's a prayer, Silas murmured, for peace, for all who'll pass this door. By afternoon, a wagon arrived from Arroyo Crossing. Widow Mercy Callahan climbed down with a basket of bread and her usual warm grin. You've stirred the whole town, Silas Brenner, she said. Half of 'em think you're a saint. The other half think you've lost your wits. Silas chuckled. I ain't much of either, ma'am. Just a man trying to make right use of his sight. She looked at Nalina kindly. And you, dear, how's that shoulder? Healed, Nalina said. But hearts in town are not. Mercy sighed. Give 'em time. Fear don't fade fast, but it fades. Before she left, She asked Silas to pray for a sick child at the fort. That evening, he and Nalina knelt by the spring. She sang in her language while he spoke softly in English. The two prayers twined like threads of one cloth. A week later, a rider came with news. The boy had recovered. "The fever broke the day after you prayed," he said. Word spread like wildfire. People began calling the place the Healing Mission. At first, Silas worried it would draw more curiosity than faith, but he soon saw good fruit. Travelers brought candles, flour, and stories of hope. When one old rancher left his crutch behind, saying his knee no longer ached, even Reverend Avery heard. The preacher arrived again one evening, dust on his coat and weariness in his eyes. He found Silas outside, sanding the new cross smooth. "You still at your work?" Avery asked quietly. "Work's a kind of worship," Silas replied. "You're welcome to join us." Avery studied the carving, tracing the seam where the two woods met. "Oak and mesquite. You mean to show something by that?" "I mean to show that God don't pick favorites in color or soil." The preacher said nothing for a long time. Finally, he murmured, "Maybe I judged too quick." "Maybe we both did," Silas said gently. They talked until the stars came out. Avery didn't stay, but his tone had softened. When he rode away, Nalina came out from the doorway, eyes shining. "He will change," she said. "I reckon the Lord's been changing him already," Silas said. "And maybe me too." By midsummer, the cross stood finished, a tall, shining symbol of the world they hoped to build. Silas planted it just beyond the mission door, where all could see. As the sun set behind the hills, its light turned gold, blending the two woods into one bright beam. Nalina placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "It sings." Silas smiled. "Then may it never stop." That night, as coyotes cried and wind swept across the canyon, the cross stood firm against the sky, half pale, half dark, but whole. The days grew long and still, the heat heavy enough to press sound flat. Even the spring behind the mission ran slower, whispering instead of singing. But in that hush, peace held, until one night when the wind changed. Silas woke first. Something felt wrong. The air tasted of smoke, faint and bitter. He sat up, heart pounding. "Nalina," he said quietly. "Do you smell that?" She stirred, her senses sharp. "Yes, horses." He grabbed his coat and stepped outside. A thin orange glow flickered against the horizon. His stomach dropped. "Riders," he whispered. Before he could speak again, 3 figures came out of the dark. The same bounty men from before. Their torches blazed bright, faces twisted with anger and sweat. The leader spat into the dirt. "Evening, preacher's pet," he sneered. "We heard your witch girl's been healing folks again." Silas moved to block the doorway. "You've no right here. This is church land." The man laughed. "Church don't own the truth. You do? Let's see if your God saves you tonight." He swung the torch in a wide arc, sending sparks over the dry brush near the wall. The fire caught quick, running like a snake through the grass. "Stop!" Silas shouted. But they only laughed and rode around the chapel, lighting more. Inside, Nalina grabbed their few belongings, the carving tools, a pouch of herbs, the small Bible, and shouted, "The mule!" Silas dashed to the stable, releasing the frightened animal just before the roof caved in with a roar. Heat washed over him, singeing his hair. One of the riders lunged from the shadows, knocking him hard to the ground. "Where's the girl?" he barked. Silas swung blindly, striking the man's arm with a wooden beam. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he scrambled up. "You'll not take her!" A torch swung toward his face. He ducked, catching a glimpse of Nalina behind the smoke. She held her brother's necklace tight in her fist, eyes blazing. Then one of the riders caught her by the braid and yanked her back. She kicked and screamed, but they overpowered her. Silas charged forward, but another blow to his temple dropped him to one knee. The world tilted. The last thing he saw before blackness took him was the cross. His cross, standing tall against the flames, glowing gold like a sword in the sky. When he came to, dawn was just breaking. The mission was a skeleton of smoke and ash. The roof had fallen, and the air still burned with the smell of charred wood and wet clay. He staggered to his feet, calling her name. "Nalina," his voice cracked. "Girl!" No answer, only the cry of a hawk circling overhead. He stumbled through the ruins until he found the cross. The lower beam was blackened, but it still stood. He dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against it. "Lord, why?" he whispered. "You gave me sight. Don't take her away." His eyes stung from smoke, blurring what was left of the world. He saw her footprints in the soot leading toward the canyon road, smaller ones beside boot tracks. They had taken her alive. He pushed himself up, dizzy, hands shaking. "You won't harm her," he said through clenched teeth. His mule stood trembling nearby, singed but alive. Silas loaded a flask of water, his staff, and the half-burned Bible into the saddlebag. He turned once toward the ruined mission. The cross still gleamed faintly where morning light struck the oak beam. It seemed to whisper, "Go." So he did. He started down the trail on foot, leading the mule, his head throbbing, his lungs aching from the smoke. Each step felt like walking on broken glass. But he didn't stop. Behind him, the ashes stirred in the breeze, curling into the air like gray prayers rising to heaven. The smoke of the burned mission clung to Silas's clothes and hair for days. It seeped into his skin, into his breath. When he started walking that morning, he carried only what the mule could bear: a flask of water, a heel of bread, and the charred half of the Bible that had survived the fire. His sight blurred at the edges, burned raw from the smoke. He could hardly tell where the road ended and the horizon began, but he kept going because stopping meant she'd be gone forever. The desert stretched before him like a long punishment. Silent, empty, endless. Each step stirred up dust that coated his boots and turned his lips white. The sun climbed early, fierce as judgment. Sweat mixed with ash and ran down his face, stinging the small cut on his temple. He spoke aloud to keep his courage steady. "She's alive," he told the wind. "She's strong, Lord. I know you didn't bring her to me just to take her away." The mule plodded beside him, ribs showing, eyes dull. Every few miles, Silas stopped to rest in the scant shade of a boulder. He tore the bread into small pieces, shared half with the mule, and drank from the flask one careful sip at a time. By midday, his legs trembled. His head pounded like a drum. He could almost hear Nalina's song in the wind, the same tune she'd hummed by the spring when they first came to the mission. "Remember mercy," she'd said. He prayed then, out loud, the words cracked but sure. "Father, I'm tired, but I won't stop. If you're still walking beside me, show me her trail." When he lifted his eyes, he saw something small glinting on the road ahead. He limped, closer. It was a bead, blue glass, like the ones from Nalina's necklace. He held it tight, trembling. She had dropped it on purpose. A jolt of strength went through him. He pressed on. The trail bent west toward Arroyo Crossing, the nearest town large enough for a jail. He knew the bounty men wouldn't take her anywhere else. The army wouldn't touch her without proof of crime, and bounty hunters loved coin more than law. The second day, clouds gathered low and gray, bringing relief from the heat. A small rain fell, barely enough to wet the ground, but Silas tilted his face toward it, mouth open. "Much obliged," he whispered. "Didn't deserve that, but I thank you anyway." He passed through dry arroyos, his boots sinking in sand. Coyotes followed at a distance. He sang under his breath to keep them from creeping too close. Old hymns from childhood, lines about faith when the way is dark. "Lead, kindly light, amid the encircling gloom," he murmured, though the melody broke in his throat. By the third morning, he reached the river bend where cottonwoods grew thick. The land smelled of water and horses. From there, he could see the faint plume of smoke that marked Arroyo Crossing. His heart kicked. He was almost there. But his body wanted to stop. His knees buckled more than once, and his vision dimmed until everything shimmered. He pushed forward anyway. Every time his strength wavered, he saw her face in memory. Eyes fierce, hands steady, faith unbroken. Near sunset, he crested the ridge overlooking the town. The low roofs glowed red in the fading light. Bells from the small church rang faintly in the distance. The mule brayed, weary but willing. Silas patted its neck. "We made it, old friend," he said hoarsely. "Now let's finish this road." He reached the main street just as lanterns flickered to life. The town looked smaller than he remembered, just a row of shops, the saloon with its swinging doors, and the sheriff's office at the far end, lit by one yellow window. Folks stopped what they were doing when they saw him. This soot-blackened man leading a trembling mule, eyes wild and clothes torn. Someone whispered, "That's Brenner, the blind carpenter who sees now." He didn't answer. He just kept walking, dust rising around his boots. When he reached the jail, Sheriff Amos Dahl leaned in the doorway, hat low, toothpick in his mouth. "Well, I'll be," Dahl said with a grin, "if it ain't the miracle man himself. You look half dead, Brenner." "Where is she?" Silas asked, voice raw. "Who?" "You know who. The Apache girl you took." The sheriff spat into the dirt, smirking. "She's inside. Been singing her heathen songs all day, making my deputy nervous." He stepped closer. "You'd best turn around, preacher man. The law don't look kindly on traitors." Silas's hands clenched at his sides. "The only law I follow is the Lord's. You release her." Dahl laughed. "You gone blind again, old fool? You got no power here." "I got truth," Silas said quietly, "and that scares you." The sheriff's grin faltered. "You best get out of my sight." Silas took one slow step closer. His voice rose, not in anger, but in something stronger. Conviction. "You call her criminal, but she's the only one here that's done a holy thing. She saved a man, she healed a child, and you call that a crime?" The townsfolk had gathered now, drawn by the sound of his voice. Men stepped from the saloon, women from the store porch. The crowd grew thick. Someone whispered, "He's talking about the Apache girl." Dahl barked, "Disperse, folks. Ain't nothing to see." But no one moved. Silas turned, his smoke-stung eyes sweeping over them. "How many of you came to the mission for help?" he asked. "How many drank her water or took her bread when you had none? She gave you what she had, and now you stand by while she sits behind bars?" A murmur rippled through the people. Mercy Callahan pushed her way to the front, her apron still dusted with flour. "Sheriff," she said, voice sharp, "you got no proof of wrong. Let her out." Dahl's face reddened. "You hush, woman." "I'll not," she shot back. "That girl's done more godly work than any of us." The preacher's voice cut through next. Reverend Avery stepped forward from the back of the crowd, hat in his hands. His expression was heavy, torn between pride and shame. "Sheriff," he said slowly, "perhaps it's time we stop calling Grace by the wrong name." The sheriff glared at him. "You gone soft too?" Avery didn't answer. He looked at Silas, then at the jail. "She's in the cell?" "Aye," Silas said, "and I aim to see her free." Avery nodded once. "Then I'll stand with you." He turned to the crowd. "Brothers and sisters, how long will we close our eyes to what the Lord's already shown? The man was blind, and now he sees. The child was sick, and now he's well. This girl's hands brought light to both. And you call that sin?" Silence fell, thick as smoke. Then someone muttered, "She healed my wife." Another voice, "She prayed for my boy." One by one, heads bowed. The sheriff's jaw worked, his hand twitching near his holster, but he saw the tide turning and knew better than to draw. "Fine," he muttered. "You want her? She's yours. But don't come crying when trouble follows." He turned, kicked the door open, and stalked inside. A moment later, the jail keys clattered on the porch. Silas took them, his hands trembling. He stepped through the doorway. Inside, the air smelled of iron and candle wax. In the far cell sat Nalina, her hair tangled, her wrists bruised. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "You came," she whispered. "Always," he said, unlocking the door. "We're going home." She stood slowly, wincing. "The mission?" he swallowed. "Burned. But the cross still stands." She reached for his hand. "Then it still breathes." Outside, the townsfolk waited in silence. When she stepped into the lamplight, some gasped. Others bowed their heads. She looked at them, not with bitterness, but pity. Silas spoke again, his voice steady and low. "You feared her because she was different. But maybe God sent her to show us how blind we all been." The wind picked up, scattering dust through the street. Somewhere a church bell began to ring, soft, hesitant, like a heart remembering how to beat. Nalina lifted her face to the sky and began to sing, her voice carrying clear and strong. It wasn't loud, but it reached every ear. Even those who didn't know the words felt their meaning: mercy, forgiveness, peace. Silas bowed his head beside her. Avery knelt. Widow Mercy clasped her hands. The sheriff stood apart, hat in hand, eyes fixed on the ground. When the song ended, no one spoke. The night felt lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from the town's heart. Silas turned to Nalina. "Let's go," he said softly. "There's still work to do." They walked together through the gathered crowd, side by side. No one stopped them. Some reached out to touch their sleeves as they passed, like pilgrims brushing a relic. At the edge of town, Silas looked back once. The lamplight flickered on faces that had once turned away, but now watched in silence, maybe even in shame. He whispered a prayer for them all, for mercy to finish what fire had started. When he and Nalina stepped into the desert road again, dawn was breaking. The first light touched the ashes on his coat, making them shine silver. "Where will we go?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly, eyes lifting toward the horizon. Wherever the Lord still needs light. And as they walked, the wind carried the sound of her song ahead of them, soft, defiant, and full of promise. Rain fell that night, slow and cold. The desert street turned to mud, and the last of the townsfolk drifted home. Only Silas and Nalina stayed outside the jail, standing in the downpour as though washed clean. The sheriff had gone inside, muttering, his power broken like a rusted chain. Silas sank to his knees in the mud, hands open to the sky. His voice trembled, but it carried through the rain. "Lord, forgive them. They knew not what they did, but now they've seen your light, same as I have." His prayer drew others back out. The widow first, then the preacher, then even the blacksmith. Lanterns flickered to life one by one along the street, soft halos glowing in the storm. Reverend Avery stepped forward, soaked and shaking, his Bible clutched tight. "You were right, Brother Brenner," he said. "Grace don't ask who it touches. It just does." Nalina closed her eyes and began to sing, her song of mercy and rain. The melody wove through the night, lifting hearts, binding strangers together in a single rhythm of hope. When she finished, silence fell. Even the thunder hushed, as if heaven itself was listening. Reverend Avery turned to the sheriff's office and called, "Set her free. In God's eyes, she's done nothing but good." The door opened, and Dal stepped out, face pale. Without a word, he unlocked the last chain from her wrist and dropped it in the mud. Silas rose, his clothes soaked through, and took her hand. "It's over," he said softly. "No," she whispered. "It's beginning." The preacher knelt beside them both, pressing his hand to the muddy street. "This ground's been cleansed tonight," he said, "by water, by tears, and by truth." Silas looked toward the sky, where the clouds were breaking apart. The moon came through faint but certain. "Then let's build again," he said. As dawn crept over the horizon, the bell in the church tower began to ring, a single clear note that rolled across the land. Its sound carried far beyond the town, echoing over the mesas and into the valleys where new hope waited to take root. The morning after the storm smelled of wet dust and new beginnings. Mist hung low over the river flats, and the sunrise turned the clouds to gold. Silas and Nalina walked back toward the ruins of the mission, the mule trailing behind them. The land was quiet, as if holding its breath. When they reached the old site, ashes covered everything. The chapel walls still stood, blackened but strong. Silas removed his hat and stood silent a long time. "She gave us shelter," he whispered. "Now we'll give her life again." Nalina knelt beside the charred cross, brushing away soot with her sleeve. "It still stands," she said softly. "The earth didn't let it fall." In the following weeks, people came from every direction. Ranchers brought timber, soldiers brought nails, and the widow came with food and songs to keep spirits up. Even Reverend Avery labored with his coat off, driving in beams with calloused hands. "This house will serve all hearts," he said. Under the same sun, Silas and Nalina worked side by side, laughter mingling with hammer strikes. She taught children from both tribes and towns to plant flowers near the spring, while Silas carved new benches and window frames. "Let light find every corner," he said. When the army captain arrived to inspect the site, he was moved. "The government can spare this land," he declared. "Let it belong to peace." The words brought tears to Silas's eyes. The old soldier tipped his hat to Nalina. "Your song changed more than one town, girl." As days passed, Silas noticed his sight dimming again. The world softened around the edges, as if God himself was easing him back into gentler darkness. He told no one until one evening when Nalina found him squinting at his work. "Your eyes," she said quietly. He smiled. "Fading, I reckon. But I've seen enough to believe forever." When the new chapel was, finished, they hung the restored cross above the doorway. The sunlight caught it just right, half oak, half mesquite, shining as one. Nalina looked up and whispered, "It's breathing again." Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. "Aye, so are we." The people gathered that night to sing. Some prayed, others wept. The mission's bell rang once more, calling everyone, white, Apache, soldier, and farmer, under the same roof of mercy. Spring returned to the mesa, soft and green after the rains. The mission bell rang clear across the valley, calling children of settlers and Apaches to learn and sing together. Nalina taught them with patience, her laughter bright in the morning air. Inside, Silas sat by the window, carving tiny crosses of oak and mesquite. His eyes were blind again, but his heart saw everything that mattered. When the lesson ended, she brought him tea. "They learn fast," she said. He smiled. "That's the miracle. They see one another now." At sunset, she sat beside him. He placed a small carving in her hand, a girl leading a blind man. "It's us," she whispered. "Aye," he said, still walking his road. The bell rang again, its echo soft over the hills. Silas lifted his face toward the light. "I was blind," he said, "but now we all can see. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."